I think the perception of Florida around the world is that it's a place where people want to go.
The same way California attracts a certain crowd,
Maybe it's because of that famous Bugs Bunny moment where he saws Florida off.
Florida's a low-tax, multicultural haven.
Eating people's faces and having sex with alligators and, whatever you're doing, it's not working, Florida.
Caribbean and Latin American influences.
We need to find a boogeyman. You know what I mean? Whose fault is it? It's nobody's fault. It's capitalism.
Like most people living in Florida, I've got problems with Florida. Tomas, I know you've got some problems with Florida too, right?
Yeah, I got a lot of problems with Florida.
Shame on you! You are an embarrassment! You are falsifying information and you are misleading the public. Shame on you. Don't touch social distance. Don't touch me. Shame on both of you.
Jerry, what about you?
I'm pretty good with Florida because I don't live there anymore. So I don't have no real antagonisms these days.
Yeah, way to out us like right away that 1/3 of our new podcast doesn't live here.
Like 1/3 of Florida, I'm from New York. So this actually is representation.
Gerald's the control group.
Yeah. A lot of my friends are so I've never read a work of fiction since high school. I'm just not interested in it. But being in Florida for 4 years, I do feel like I lived fiction for a little while, and so I don't really feel the need.
Maybe you've been under a rock for the past 25 years or so, and you only think of Florida as a swampy, sunny, middle American vacation getaway, not the throbbing, engorged disaster that it's become since the 2000 election. But you feel it just walking outside. We're experiencing more extreme weather every year because we're ground zero for climate change. Between fish kill, red tide, algae blooms, saltwater intrusion from the rising tides, thousands of broken septic tanks, half the state stinks like shit. You can't walk anywhere because the other half is covered in concrete. So the entire state is just a bunch of 8-lane highways and freeways connecting strip malls, big box retailers, and suburban wastelands. Our infrastructure is crumbling, literally crumbling, collapsing on our heads, or falling out from underneath us like so many sinkholes. While we have beautiful beaches and incredible places like Miami and Key West, you've got to traverse hundreds of miles of the most bleak, drab American landscape to get there. We are steeped in poverty. People die in the stupidest, most preventable ways every day. Everyone is pissed off. Everyone is armed. There's abject violence around every corner, just waiting to become a snarky national headline the next day.
I mean, it's pretty bad here. The state has been completely controlled by a Republican trifecta. And even before that, the Florida Democratic Party was, controlled by the Dixiecrats. They were a conservative Democratic Party. But since Republicans have taken over, they basically have run the state as a one-party totalitarian government that has become increasingly more authoritarian as their power has been left unchecked. And now we have a pretty wide majority of Republican senators in the state Senate. You have a huge spread in the Florida House, 70 something to 40 something Republican Democrats, and of course Ron DeSantis was filling every single cabinet position with his cronies. People like Manny Diaz as Department of Education, or Cord Bird, a person that has an actual QAnon flag on his boat, which is the most fucking Florida thing I've ever heard of, as the Secretary of State. The person that oversees our election is a QAnon psychopath. So these are the people that are making decisions for us. And then at the local level, the corruption across the state is unbelievable. I mean, just to illustrate how bad the situation is, in Miami-Dade, we just had the county commission approve a stipend for ex-county commissioners, for outgoing and retired politicians, to that elected body that's called the County Ambassador Program. And they're basically getting $25,000 a year to do completely ceremonial things, like going to ceremonies and cutting ribbons. And that's coming from us, the taxpayers. And it's going to cost us $8 million in total. So, it's not good. It's not good at all, David.
I think people from outside Florida, look at Florida. I mean, politically, the biggest misapprehension is that it's a purple state. I think because like the tightness of the elections at the national level, people come away with a perception that it's like half Democrat, half Republican. I'd never seen a Confederate flag until I moved to Florida. I never saw one until I was in Miami, Florida, which was the last place I probably would have expected to see one. And then going up with Tomas to Tallahassee, seeing Confederate flags draping a lot of the graves at the state capitol was a little jarring. Just assumes that, well, you know, must be some kind of like power struggle between the Dems and the Republicans. Did not know that the Florida Democratic Party is essentially like the New York Republican Party, where it's like, you know, career rehabilitation for people who failed elsewhere, and now this is going to be their new gig. Yeah. I did not know that it was essentially like a rump apparatus of a party.
We are losing our country because of big tech election interference.
It took 3 minutes. In 3 minutes, 6-year-old Elian Gonzalez, dressed in a t-shirt, draped in fear.
Today we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar conspiracy and using it as an entry point for the whole podcast. But why don't we start with exactly who the hell we are? I'll go first. My name's David Quinones. I've been doing journalism in Miami for about 17 years. Most recently, I hosted a dog shit podcast called Bird Road. During that show, one of the people that I met was a young activist working at the Florida Immigrant Coalition at the time, whose general worldview was strikingly similar to my own. Today, he's grizzled, less young, and he's my co-host, Tomas Kennedy.
Yeah, man, this place fucking ages you out. But I'm a writer, I'm an organizer, and just, you know, an advocate here, trying to fight back, put my little grain in the sand against the fucking corruption and bullshit that we're saddled with every day. And I'll pass it over to Gerald.
Yes, I met Tomas in the early Trump years. Actually, the very first political, I guess not protest, but the very first like political meeting I ever went to was the PPC meeting with Jeff Weaver in the beginning of 2017.
We were resistance bros together.
Yes. So you know, I'm still involved in, you know, a lot of that work, but you know, by day I'm an associate producer and a video editor. So when Tomas and David said that they were working on this, I obviously like jumped at the chance to help, you know, collaborate and build this out.
So I think the biggest challenge as the three of us embark on this venture is not to just make it be like an episode of Scooby-Doo, where every time at the end they pull off the mask and we're like, ha, it was capitalism all along, even though like that's kind of hard because a lot of times it is legitimately capitalism or some element of it.
So I was watching Scooby-Doo in 2019 when I was recovering from a trip to urgent care, and all of the villains are like guys who dress up as like goofsters in order to like haunt and drive down the price of a piece of real estate to do like some kind of land swindle.
Yeah, it's some sort of land. It's always a land swindle. Yeah.
If Scooby-Doo isn't set in Orlando, I don't know where it's set.
It's like the what. I just think of like all the abandoned theme parks, and of the abandoned theme parks, my favorite is the Jesus Land. Yeah, and the Jesus Land, like that was one where they like specifically like drove the value of that into the dirt, and now you just drive by and there's just like a falling apart Roman Colosseum on the corner on the edge of I-4, and
so it's not operating.
That I think is probably like as easy to. I don't think it works anymore now. Oh. I drove by it. It looks very derelict. Yeah. I mean, maybe there's like rogue groups of like former Roman centurions who have made their homes there. Yeah, I mean, it could be affordable housing. Yeah. I mean, those people, that's precarity work. If you're an actor at Jesus Land or whatever. I'm calling it Jesus Land. It was probably called something else. I'm sure it wasn't called Jesus Land.
Yeah. I was going to say if it's open, If it's open, we should definitely do an episode out of there.
You know that Bill Maher did a scene in his movie, his insufferable atheism movie. He went there and like made fun of all the people there.
You watched their like Passion show or whatever, right?
Right. Yeah, they did. They did a rendering of Passion of the Christ, and he just looking at the camera doing a Jim from The Office every 5 seconds, like.
That was when I realized that Bill Maher is basically Squidward. Like his whole ethos is, if only people were smart like me instead of stupid like the way they are.
That's a good take, actually. He is like Squidward.
Yeah, he's got strong Squidward positioning. Yeah. For me, because if there's anything I want to do about this podcast, it's make it about me. So for me, in the pantheon of all the problems that Florida man like myself have to face, my biggest one right now is the fact that I'm in danger of losing my biggest asset, all because, and it's not my ass, but I could also lose part of that as well. All because of an interlocking system of free market failures to adequately provide something that should be one of the most boring, milquetoast, afterthought financial transactions that there is, homeowners insurance. So we've talked about this a little bit, the homeowners insurance crisis. And like the reason that we're using this, even though a big chunk of Florida are renters, it literally affects everybody. And it's kind of like the ideal when you look at it when you look at Florida through the lens of this one issue, it's like everything that's wrong with the state you can find in this one issue, like kind of baked into it, right? So our story begins right in front of my house. It's an early evening in April. I strolled out to the front of my house to open the mailbox. Inside, among circulars, junk mail, and bills, I found a letter from my homeowner's insurance company, Sarasota-based Centauri Specialty Insurance. I opened the letter, addressed to me, and here's what it said.
Dear policyholder, the insurer hereby serves notice that this policy, in accordance with the terms and conditions, will not be renewed, and all coverages will cease at 12:01 a.m. Standard Time at the insured location on the policy's expiration date indicated above. Prior to your expiration of your policy, please contact your agent regarding continuation of your coverage.
The letter also explained why I was being dropped.
Reason for non-renewal: exposure management.
Exposure management? What the fuck is that? Now, in normal times, I wouldn't give this a second thought. It's just property insurance, one of the most mundane financial transactions that someone can engage in. You don't even have to write a check. It just comes out of your escrow account. But these are not normal times. The best property insurance companies are the ones you never have to actually think much about. They blend into the background of your life. In Florida, you keep their information handy during hurricane season, especially during hurricane season. So I set about trying to find a new insurance carrier because there's so many out there, right? But I wasn't the only one doing that. And I'm going to drop in a news clip here that I have cut out. There were 0 options on the open market for me, which meant I could qualify for the quote-unquote insurer of last resort here in Florida, which is called Citizens Property Insurance. My broker started my application and came back really quickly with bad news. See, back in 2019, I had a leaky pipe that busted in my ceiling. It discolored my walls in the hallway, and it caused damage in our guest bathroom. So we, like idiots, assumed this was a good situation to use fucking property insurance, the stuff that we pay thousands of dollars for. But that was a bad move. In February of this year, Citizens, the insurer of last resort, passed a rule internally inside their company, not publicly, stating that it would not accept new policies from homes with 2 or more non-weather water-related damage within 36 months of each other. So that last resort insurer rejected me. Now, I'm in hot water with my mortgage lender because they're threatening to put me in something called force-placed insurance, which is just really a policy that protects the mortgage company, not the homeowner. My premiums went from $1,900 a year to $4,000 for something that now can barely be described as insurance. And this all comes at a time when we're in the middle of what is starting to become an active tropical storm and active hurricane season. It's not hard to see this development, which threatens pretty much every homeowner and every person too, because if you're a renter, you're subject to your landlord's homeowner insurance. It's hard to see this as something that's anything more than a threat for anybody who can't afford that extra $2,000 a year to pay to their insurance company in the context of home and rental of this larger home and rental affordability crisis that's been ongoing here pretty much since the beginning of the pandemic. Realtor.com just named Florida the least affordable state to live in. In Miami, renters pay 60% of their income to housing. You can consider the affordability crisis sort of parallel with the wage crisis, where typical working class Floridian salary continue to be stagnant despite the influx of high and ultra high net worth individuals, which are really the people that are moving down here. They come here with certain expectations expressly. They come here because of our lack of regulatory environment, because of our lack of worker protections, our lower taxes, no state income tax, although Floridians end up paying more through other avenues than almost anybody else does. But we love to point out that we have no state income tax. We also love to lie to ourselves about our economic opportunities. Republicans like Governor Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott, they regularly hold these press conferences where they tout Florida's low unemployment rate and the addition of more jobs to the economy, despite the fact that those jobs often don't materialize. And we also learned in the beginning of the pandemic that Florida's unemployment rate is mostly fiction because it's based off of a flawed, fucked up, intentionally malfunctioning unemployment system that doesn't count everybody and is, to this day, difficult to use. Did you guys know that the Florida unemployment website has banker's hours? The website, like when you go to the actual website, it's only open from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Yeah,
I've never heard of a fucking website that's not open, that has like hours.
it's ridiculous.
Any effort to point out these inequities is met with a conservative rejoinder about Florida's freedom, despite the fact that we have one of the highest incarceration rates in the nation and are home to some of the most punitive, petty, overly aggressive police departments and sheriffs in the country. You think you're free here? Try being black or brown and walking through a white suburb in Jupiter. Try setting up a lemonade stand with your kid on a weekend in Destin. Try enjoying any recreational drug, legal or otherwise, while not being rich. See how free you are. We are unsurprisingly near the top of housing insecurity, and guess what happens to the families and people who find themselves without roofs over their heads? In every objective metric, Florida is one of, if not the most cruel place to be unhoused in the country. Why? Those low taxes mean that there are few protections, no social safety net or programs to cash people when they fall. The lack of state regulatory oversight also means that corporations and, you guessed it, insurance companies can do whatever the fuck they want, and they never have to worry about any kind of repercussions. This also facilitates the irony that the state most at risk for the effects of climate change is also the state where corporations can dump pretty much anything in the water without being held to account. But hey, at least there's no state income tax. So you see how this one little topic is kind of an allegory. It's an entryway into everything that we think of when we think of Florida's dysfunction. Taken together, it feels like a concerted effort to push us all toward the sort of Ida Aachen World Economic Forum reality that we all have heard about on social media, the whole you will own nothing and you will like it. That's like I'll tell you guys, like as somebody who owns a house, as somebody who has a kid in public schools, these are all things that we're going to be talking about on the show. Like that's how it feels. It feels like you're being pushed. Like the gravity is, yeah, we know that you're used to these specific expectations of life, to be able to like have a house and to have a kid go to school and not have to pay like 30 grand to ransom Everglades. But you know what? No, the reality is that you're going to end up, having to come out of pocket, barely getting by every single month. And, life is just basically going to be unaffordable and unsustainable.
That was one of the more common stories I would hear of people who moved down to Florida, especially if they'd been there a long time, was thinking they were doing so, giving themselves a leg up, or, the cost of living would be low and they'd be able to keep more of their money. And then feeling like nothing but the squeeze of trying to make it from one day to the next. Like, I do think that is one of the more common stories you'll hear in Florida, people who came in the hopes of like having a better life for themselves and are now feeling trapped, in Florida, like flies in amber almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when, I first came to Florida back in 2001. I mean, I was a child. But thinking about that, my parents came as immigrants, no papers, no real prospects, just trying to make it. And the first apartment that we had was in North Beach by Manolos, David, which at the time was Little Buenos Aires. That's where all the Argentinians were fleeing to because, my home country had just gone through a massive economic implosion caused by, IMF neoliberal policies imposed by the center-right government of Carlos Menem at the time. And, the apartment that we got was 4 blocks away from the beach. It's still a working class neighborhood, but at the time a very working class neighborhood, but very nice, close to the beach, 1-bedroom apartment, with like pool, everything. It was $650. $650 for 1-bedroom apartment 4 blocks away from the beach. Like that's
It's got to be north. It's got to be like probably now. If you look at the estimate for it, it's probably like if you wanted to just buy that apartment instead of rent it, it's probably a solid like $1.8 million.
And even if you want to rent it, it's probably like at least 1,500. No, probably not because it's 1 bedroom, but at least, yeah, no, it's probably like close to $2,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
over three times markup. And how can you afford that? I mean, I don't know if you all saw, but one of the solutions coming from the county for the affordable housing crisis is to basically allow homes to set up efficiencies, like breakaway little studio apartments in their property, which, it's relief, but at the same time, is that their solution that like people, especially people with families, are just going to live in like little studio apartments attached to larger single family homes? Are we not going to do anything about the fact that maybe zoning single family homes to suburban sprawl is not like the ideal urban planning, design?
Yeah, these solutions remind me of like and I know we've talked about it before, the Marco Rubio plan for I don't even remember what the I guess just general affordability. I can't remember what the context was that he proposed this plan, but his plan was payday loans for your Social Security.
Yes,
where you can basically just take out a payday loan against your Social Security, and don't worry about 65-year-old you. I'm sure you'll get it together by then.
Yeah.
Everything's going great. By the time you're 65, we'll be over this little hump of 21st century neoliberal economic degradation.
Yeah.
But
freedom is when you live in a pod and you take out a reverse mortgage on Social Security. That's when you're free.
Reverse pod mortgage. But yeah, it's like nothing is easy anymore. All of these programs that we talk about, like they're all half measures. At most, they're not even half measures. Like they all are just betray this huge lack of ideas, like of what to do besides just voting with your feet, right? That's what, Jared, I'm interested. Like, have you seen, there was a trend piece the other day about New Yorkers who tried to do Florida and like at the beginning of the pandemic and only lasted about a year and came back. Have you heard or seen anybody like in that scenario where they said, hell no, that place is too fucked up. It didn't work out the way that I hoped.
I mean, a lot of it that I've seen are people who were able to get in before the price of real estate shot through the roof. People who came in 2018, 2019 that I know are still down there. Like you said, people who went down during the pandemic expecting, Shangri-La and, steaks and shakes and what have you. Yeah, a lot of them have come back now. And I do think a lot of it's the sticker shock, like thinking like, oh, there's no state income tax. And like to Tomas's apartment example, something that cost $600 some odd years ago is now triple, if not more than that. And it's hard to feel free when you're paying a 300% premium on something. So it's just not worth it.
Exactly. So we're looking for answers, and hopefully our next guest will, our first guest ever in the history of our podcast, will help us shed a little bit of light on exactly why we're like this. So we want to welcome the first guest of our first episode here to help us shed light on this property insurance problem, the way that we were just talking about it, the deep tendrils that it has across our real estate market, our economy, and how it serves as sort of a foot in the door for this larger conversation of exactly why we are like this. And our first guest is State Representative, soon to be Congresswoman, Anna Eskamani.
Or
Representative Eskamani, welcome.
Congratulations.
Wow, thanks guys. Thanks for the promotion.
On a walk here.
So to recapitulate what we were just talking about, I've been dealing with this issue on sort of the front lines myself. My own property insurance in my 1940 Miami's bungalow down here, there's just no market for it. Like, I can't find property insurance. It doesn't exist for a bunch of various reasons. Citizens doesn't want me on their insurance rolls, which we talked about how there's sort of like a perverse incentive structure there where Citizens actually doesn't want a whole bunch of people on their rolls.
Right.
So I was wondering if you could maybe start by taking us through behind the scenes of the special legislative session that was supposed to address this issue. What happened, what maybe went wrong, and how it fell short.
For sure. I mean, this is a crisis that's impacting Floridians across the state, including right here in Central Florida where I am, but especially in coastal communities, because let's be real, the risk is higher in coastal communities. And when the state continues to ignore the impacts of climate change, which ironically insurance companies quantify when they're calculating charges and risk, yet the state of Florida ignores it, then you're going to see more and more situations of companies saying, I'm out, because they don't want to navigate the risk in Florida. And also you see really, really responsible homeowners who are improving their roofs, who are investing in hardening of their homes, that are still getting dropped and or exorbitant rates. So the system is criminally broken. And when you're in the legislature, there's so many different stakeholders and profits involved that can really muddy up just the goal of solving the crisis. And the special session that was hosted early on in the summer was very much motivated by public pressure, right? So you have Senator Jeff Brandes, who is very much a pro-insurance kind of a guy. Like, if his biggest thing is fraud, that there's the trial bar is to blame. We have to reduce the litigious, fraudulent environment. But if you ask the opposing side of that debate, insurance companies are not paying claims. And so people involve lawsuits because they're not getting paid for legitimate claims. And I'll tell you that in my district, we've had tornadoes in the past, and there are folks who are waiting 2 years to get paid for roof damage that is legitimate and is a clear claim. With that said, Senator Jeff Brandes actually made the request for a special session through the legislative approach, which is basically a poll. You petition the state, the Secretary of State, for a special session. If enough lawmakers agree with you, then a poll is triggered. Majority of Republicans just ignored the poll. So the call for special session being led by lawmakers failed.
That doesn't sound like them. That's so weird.
Just pretend like the problem doesn't exist, right? And then the governor feels a lot of public pressure on this because it's a campaign season and he's on the ballot, and this is a clear crisis that are impacting people. So the governor then convenes a special legislative session, and we all go back to Tallahassee. This is in late May, and it's pretty clear, per usual, that diverse ideas are not going to be considered, that behind the scenes a bill is being worked on between Republicans and insurance companies, and that will be the main vehicle that progresses forward. And that's exactly what happened. You have a bill in front of you that was crafted by the insurance industry, and the bill sponsor himself says that it might take 18 months to see relief from this bill, if ever. That is a verbatim quote from the bill sponsor on the Senate side, who works for the insurance industry. Now, what does the bill do? Now, there are parts that are well-meaning. For example, there's a homeowners improvement fund that has already existed in the past, but has not been allocated dollars, and so that fund is getting rebuilt. It's called the Safer Home. And the point of that program is to give Floridians extra dollars to harden their homes. But not every Floridian would qualify for it, only those that live in high wind areas, so basically the bottom U of Florida. And despite the fact that we had that special session in late May, and now we're in the fall, that program has not been made available yet. So we're still waiting for its application to open, and at this point, there's just no updates. But other parts of the program of the law were basically a bailout for insurance companies. And there was no guarantee that the dollars insurance companies could apply for would be translated to savings. In fact, we filed as Democrats multiple amendments to require that any insurance company that participates in what's called the wrap fund, that those savings would have to be passed down to consumers. We'd have to physically see that, and all those amendments failed. I also filed an amendment to require that climate change data be collected and implemented to reduce the state's risk, and that also failed. And so a key area that would have delivered immediate relief never made it into the bill, and that was an expansion of the CAT fund. Long story short, one of the reasons why property insurance rates are so high is not just because of the risk in Florida and the fact that there's just less and less options as more companies leave, but also the fact that companies who provide insurance to homeowners buy insurance themselves, and that is called reinsurance. And reinsurance is a global dynamic. Its rates are based on global risks. And I believe it or not, you have companies in Florida that are not only engaged in the insurance market, but also engaged in the reinsurance markets. And one of those companies is State Farm. So State Farm lobbies heavily and donates a lot of money to allow the reinsurance market to continue to operate as it's doing, which is unbelievable costs that get passed
incredibly
down.
predatory too. For people who don't know what that is, the reinsurance market is you've got your back up against the wall, and your lender, your mortgage company, has basically a knife up against your throat, and this is what you have to buy.
Correct. Yeah, you don't have a lot of options at all. And so all those costs are passed down to the consumers. And if you expand the CAT fund would basically be a public option for reinsurance, if you will. But State Farm doesn't like that because then State Farm doesn't make money. So the CAT fund never gets expanded to the degree that it could. And that would be one way to provide immediate relief to Florida families if it wasn't for companies like State Farm lobbying against it. And so, so this bill passes. Many of us vote against it. One reason why I also vote against it is not only because I don't believe it will deliver relief, but because it strips away some consumer rights, which again, consumers who have legitimate claims today are not getting paid. And we shouldn't be making it harder for consumers to get paid. And that's part of what the bill was doing too. And of course, the governor doesn't sign this bill with a press conference, doesn't sign these bills with a fanfare. He signs them quickly and quietly with the hopes of no one really realizing what he just did, was that he passed a bailout for insurance companies. He did not address reinsurance rates, and he actually stripped away consumer rights. And here we are now, months later, with the crisis only getting worse.
Which is so revelatory in and of itself that he didn't sign this with like fanfare, because this guy literally takes the state plane every other day to some part of Florida to, tout his quote unquote accomplishments, or, just to talk about like woke Antifa. Like if he was proud of it, he would have definitely.
Or to announce jobs from Brandon, Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
Or to give out Biden bucks and pretend like it's his. Yeah, I mean, if it was a good bill that he would have wanted to brag about, he would 100%.
So in the preparation for a different episode of our show, I was doing a little bit of studying in Florida history, and it struck me this idea of like the election of 1920 back in Florida was the first election. Rewind a little bit. It sounds familiar, right? There were economic concerns, there were problems, there was recession on the horizon. There were a lot of not property insurance, but other, for that moment, types of economic pressures on people. And what happened? It was the first election where Black citizens of Florida were allowed to vote. And the more conservative elements of the state government whipped up a lot of anger and animosity. And that's how you got in the 1920, the election day Ocoee massacre, which is right in your backyard, right? In the state, the part of the state where that is. And I can't help but draw parallels to today. God forbid, not the same kind of violence, but the same whipping up of culture issues, of issues that are not really impacting and more really like camouflage for these real economic meat and potatoes issues that people are facing. We look to our state government and specifically to our governor, and all we see are these, dog whistles and things that are supposed to make us be inflamed or angry against our neighbors or different people who want different things. I guess what I'm asking is, that must be really frustrating for somebody who's trying to legislate solutions for real practical problems. And I want to kind of use that as a segue to talk more broadly about Florida and about how you are, how you imbibe that, how you deal with that.
It's such a great question, and it's a constant struggle of trying to just solve problems for everyday people that are not divisive. The property insurance crisis is such a great example. It impacts every person, no matter your party affiliation, no matter who you love, no matter who you worship. Like, you are impacted by this crisis. And yet Governor Ron DeSantis, in an effort to deflect and project, will continuously find reasons to try to get people to be angry and to pit groups against one another. Even the recent controversy over veterans and teachers in the state's efforts to make it easier for veterans or veteran partners to find work and to be in the field of education. Obviously there are legitimate concerns that need to be met, but this effort to pit veterans against teachers is really intentional, because you have two different communities that are very admirable in their history, and yet here's the governor trying to pit two groups that have no reason to not like each other, right? And for us to pick a side, which I'm kind of like, I don't need to pick a side. I think veterans do good work. I think teachers are amazing. There's no reason for me to be agitational at this, but that's his goal, right? It's the same thing with returning citizens. Floridians overwhelmingly voted to restore rights. And then the governor creates his elections police force. The first thing he does is go after returning citizens who accidentally voted, right? So here's another example of him trying to basically pit people against the law. And it's like, there is absolutely no reason for us not to want returning citizens to have the power to vote. And of course, accidents happen. These were folks that, unfortunately, under Amendment 4 were not eligible to vote, partly due to the fact that the legislature created barriers and created confusion. And so now, again, another effort by DeSantis to give off the impression that we want people to break the law. Again, not true, but that's his tactic, right? So we're constantly trying to solve problems while the governor is fulfilling an agenda of divisiveness and distraction, so that people are so caught up, in the culture wars, that they don't realize my property insurance is going up, and who's responsible for that? It's not Obama, right? It's not Biden. It's literally the governor, because it is the governor's administration. It is the CFO's office, which holds the Office of Insurance Regulation, that approves every single insurance rate increase. Just like it's the Public Service Commission, which is appointed by the governor, that approves rate hikes. And so none of this happens in a vacuum. But again, the entire intention of today's Republican Party is to distract, deflect, project. And that's exactly what DeSantis does in every statement he makes, and every press conference he hosts.
Yeah, but luckily we have a state utility that is apolitical and would never interfere with politics. Our state utility, thank God for FPL, right? I mean, they're great. Sorry, Tomas, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, because I'm looking into buying a home. I want to build some equity or whatever. But I'm intimidated by the process because of the whole process because of the property insurance crisis and how much it is. How it's going to impact my bottom line. Whether I'm going to be able to get my claim paid if something actually happens to my house. All the things that we've been talking about. But I guess my question is, what do you see as the horizon of where this crisis is headed? Is the legislature going to tackle this again? And if the legislature doesn't, or if they do and it's insufficient again, what's going to happen to homeowners? What are we, what can we expect?
Well, this is one of the reasons why I endorsed Charlie Crist in the gubernatorial race, because Charlie, even as a Republican governor, took on State Farm. He took on insurance companies, and he helped reduce rates as governor. And And you need someone who is willing to stand up to these companies, not accept millions of dollars from them, which is what Ron DeSantis is already doing. Because what the future is going to look like if we don't take action is you're going to see a continuation of homelessness. You're going to see folks who are just not going to be able to hold on a mortgage, because in Florida and across the country, having a mortgage is often also connected to having property insurance. And for folks who just can't afford property insurance, maybe it's not required by their bank, they're going to potentially be in harm's way with no means of recovery. And, so far we've been fortunate to not have a recently aggressive hurricane season. And, I want to knock on wood because, we've had disasters in Florida's past and of course, not only impacting our state, but impacting those around us, which has led to climate refugees. But if we don't take action on climate change, the situation is only going to get worse. And you're going to see more and more Floridians be unable to make ends meet. And it's not like renting is even a sustainable option these days because the rent's also out of control. And
Completely out of control.
Yeah. So we're creating a state where Floridians cannot afford Florida.
Yeah. We are the most, as of 2 months ago, wear the crown on our head. We are the least affordable state in the union. And
right.
That's pretty impressive.
Well, and wages are stagnant on top of that too. And we have a service economy. And so, we continuously see politicians that want to keep people poor because it allows them to maintain power. And then meanwhile, the middle class and even those that are more comfortable, right? Like even those that are upper class are struggling because they're having ridiculous property insurance increases too. So it's very interesting because it is an opportunity to also build coalitions among people of different socioeconomic backgrounds. Because again, this issue impacts every single person.
And Anna, I don't want to get too into the weeds or derail the conversation, but I think it's related. So there's a big fight right now in Central Florida and Orlando over rent stabilization, and it was initially successfully approved by the county, but now a bunch of landlords and their corporate interests are litigating against it. Can you talk a little bit about that? Explain to us the situation.
So as we noted earlier, housing affordability is a major issue right now. And of course, like you just said, David, Florida is being marked as one of the least affordable states for its people. And inflation actually is difficult across the country to navigate, but Florida is one of the worst cases, and housing costs are the reason. And not only do we just have decades of neglect to this issue, but we have the affordable housing trust funds that have been raided. You have the federal government over time moving away from public housing. And so I do think a lot of local governments, historically speaking, looked towards the federal government to solve the housing crisis. And as the federal government shifted away, local governments all of a sudden realized we have to fill in this gap and we don't have the money to do that. And then the state, as the potential source of funding here in Florida, continuously raided those dollars. And so we created this wicked problem that has no quick fix because we need to build up supply. We need to go after predatory behavior. And we have a generation of folks that are just going to be continuously navigating economic disparities based on so many other variables that, again, are just cannot be solved overnight. And so with that said, in Orange County, we're trying to look at every tool we have in our toolbox. And one of them is calling a housing emergency and then giving the voters the opportunity to decide on rent stabilization. And this rent stabilization ordinance is very narrow. It does not apply. It tries to target more of the corporate landlords. There are many exceptions, but the goal is that you would not be able to increase rent for a year by 10% if it passes, and voters have to decide. And so we have been working on this for years. I mean, the first calls for action were back during the pandemic in 2020. And every legislative session, I file policy to make it easier for local governments to pursue such an ordinance, because I have to tell you, every day we get calls to our legislative office about rent increases. And the question people have for us is, how is this legal? And I have to remind Floridians that it is absolutely legal for a landlord to increase your rent by any percentage they want. Doesn't make it ethical, but it is legal. And so we're trying to provide some layer of protection, even if it's short term, for tenants. And so we finally get to the point where Orange County commissioners, who are majority Democratic, vote to approve this measure for the ballot. And then in swoops in the associations, the corporate landlords, who then file a lawsuit. And again, it's so painful because this is a crisis. It should be treated as a crisis. And yet those who continuously profit off it don't want to see anything be done, even if it's short term, even if it has exemptions, even if it's incredibly narrow. One Band-Aid, they think it's too much. And so now, we're waiting to see if voters will even get the chance to decide on this.
So you said that like the division is something that gets sowed between so many groups here in Florida, and you've seen it like kind of play out. I mean, you go from one part of Miami across town to another, and you can feel the cultural loggerheads that you're at with people who have the same background as you in a lot of cases, who have the same, are cousins of yours in a lot of ways. And I'm wondering if maybe more division is what we need actually, because you go to the cow that has milk, right? And the part of this state that has the milk that all the companies and the corporate interests are after, it's not Wakulla County or Leon County or Jackson or whatever. It's Miami. It's Central Florida. It's Fort Lauderdale. It's Tampa. And all I see, and maybe you tell me if I'm being divisive myself here, but all I see is like a line on I-4 that we could just like separate and elect Anna Eskamani as our governor of South Florida. Like maybe we just need to cut the state in half or something like that. I don't know. But my point is, why does it always seem like it's our district, it's your district, it's
right.
our regions that are getting subjugated in these situations? We're the ones that bear the brunt of it. We're the ones that are the giver. I hate to use that kind of language, but it's true. We are the giver economies. We're the engines of this state that
right.
everybody that have become so high profile that everybody wants to move here, and it's always us, getting screwed over.
Right. Time and time again. I mean, the challenge is that Governor Ron DeSantis is now removing local elected officials who give off any type of impression of challenging him, and that's creating a chilling effect. The fact that Governor DeSantis is just removing duly elected people at local levels. I'm seeing in Orange County where I have commissioners, I have school board members, I have constitutional officers that are hesitant to challenge the governor because they don't want to be next, and that creates a.
And just to interject, but for example, in Miami-Dade County, we had this school board vote against LGBTQ History Month, which they had already approved in previous years. Yet all board members vote against it except the sponsor, including people who were fairly liberal, again, because they're cowardly and afraid to lose their jobs.
Right.
This is the environment that we live in now.
Right. And I really urge my fellow elected officials that don't prioritize you over people who elected you, right? At the end of the day, this really shouldn't be about your career. This should be about what's right for the state. And it creates this environment where even when you see an injustice, when you see a problem, you're too scared to approach it. Now, I take a lot of pride as someone who is willing to call people in before I call them out. And I try really hard to build that trust and build those relationships so that we can fight back collectively, because I do think that's going to be key. I have to remind folks all the time, imagine if all of us collectively came together, whether it's the big municipalities or different coalition groups, universities. I get very frustrated by universities not standing up against the governor as well, or the legislature. But if everyone was in unison saying, you've crossed this line and now we're going to pursue these next steps, right? Like everyone collectively organized in that fashion, then it would be very difficult for the governor to remove leaders from 5 different counties, right? Like then it becomes like politically unpopular for him to do that, right? And so I get frustrated because I actually think that there could be a lot more coalition and building across regions, because especially for the municipalities, for the regions that are generators of tax revenue, Florida can't operate without us. And so why are we not leveraging that authority, that power to then challenge the status quo and to register more people to vote? I mean, it always drives me crazy. Like, why isn't Orange County doing like county-wide voter registration? We should be contacting every resident who isn't registered to vote and send them a form. Why are we not doing that? I just, I don't understand. Like, I feel like county officials should be engaged in that level. Maybe it's because they're worried about their own accountability. Because, I mean, as Tomas was saying, not all these Democrats are leading in the best interest. I mean, we have Democrats who voted against rent stabilization, who voted against conservation, who vote with their corporate donors. So I think that's probably part of the problem, is that you have Democrats who also don't want their districts to be more engaged, because that could hurt their career paths. But for me, I think the more people who are engaged, the better. And it's a healthier democracy long term. And it's not about me. I'm not going to be here forever. I want to build a state that's going to be secure and prosperous for generations to come, way beyond me. But if you're just thinking short term of, my self-preservation, then you're going to make decisions that are not in the best interest of the state as a whole, that are not going to challenge the undemocratic direction that we're going. And we'll continue to create scenarios like affordability crises, because those are absolutely created because of neglect, but also because of corporate greed. And you need elected officials who are willing to say that and are willing to do something about it.
There are a lot of demographic quirks of this state, right? Like down here in South Florida, we have this weird thing where we are an overwhelmingly liberal or Democratic county, except we have this like streak of Cuban conservatism, right? That came, and in a lot of cases also now latter-day Venezuelan conservatism. As an elected official in Central Florida, what are some of the like built-in obstacles that you encounter when you're trying to talk about these issues, when you're trying to like bring people in instead of calling them out? Like it seems like we are a really quirky state. And again, back to our mission here, like, why are we like this? Trying to figure out the DNA of why Florida is this way. Like, what do you think about that? Like we're not like Alabama, we're not Mississippi, we're not some of these more like prohibitively conservative states. We're different. How do you process that?
Yeah, well, I'm a product of that, right? So I'm born and raised in Orlando as a daughter of immigrants. I'm first generation. My parents came to this country from Iran and met each other working at the same donut shop in Central Florida. And as I grew up in my public schools, I was always assumed to be Puerto Rican because I'm a person of color and there's not that many Iranians in Florida.
Well, we invite you to the cookout. You're welcome at the cookout.
Oh yeah. I mean, all my best friends were Puerto Rican. Like that was just, it was a natural, like comfort for me, right? To be among other people of color. And so, and my values are very much grown from being a Florida girl. I mean, I value hard work, which is something that my parents instilled in me, but I also witnessed that. I witnessed that in the custodians in my school, in my mom's coworkers at Kmart. Like, it was just something that, was very evident to me among the working class, right? Was that there's pride in work, and then of course my mom was diagnosed with cancer when I was a kid. And so I had a lot of experience with hospitals and with medical professionals. And I mean, it was incredibly traumatizing, to sit next to my mom as she gets her chemotherapy treatment and hoping to change some of her medications or medical devices. And unfortunately, she didn't make it. She passed away when I was 13 years old. And then I turned to my arts and culture community in my high school. Like, theater was my safe space as I navigated life without a mom and tried to figure out who did I want to be. And I remember always valuing the underdog, right? Because my family was the underdog. And I think that's also another Florida value is is we're very anti-elite in Florida. Florida doesn't have, a long enough history where we have these philanthropic leaders, right? There's no Rockefellers in Florida, right? Like I think college football might be, the closest thing we have to like historic icons in Florida, right? For the everyday person, anyways. Obviously for those of us that study history, we have people that we admire in Florida history, but it's not something that I think if you asked an everyday Floridian, who in our history do you admire the most? I don't know. I don't know if folks would really think about politicians, right? Because we're not old enough really to have that type of legacy, but also there's not some people who really stand out to you, right? And so our diversity is our strength, but our diversity is driven by political geography. It's driven by immigration. It's driven by our proximity to the Caribbean. And that creates a state with multiple different states inside. And when you think about political geography, there's a reason why the East Coast of Florida tends to be more liberal compared to the West Coast. That is the I-95 traffic, and that's the I-75 traffic. So you have Northeasterners who would come on vacation in Florida. They drive down the highway that eventually would make route here. And then you have Midwesterners who would come to I-75 to Naples, Fort Myers. And of course, then you have the villages like smack in the middle that is manufactured on purpose, that has really built itself to be a conservative community. And so again, none of that is, some of that is by chance, some of that is self-made, while others are dictated by policies and natural occurrences around us, including climate change. And so that builds who we are. And that's why we are so different from our sister states in the South, because like we are the culmination of so many forces around us that create an environment where I don't define Florida as a red state or a blue state. I always like to tell folks that we're a rainbow state, which means we have to build a multi-class, a multiracial, and a multi-generational coalition in order to win. That's the only way you're going to make progress in Florida. But what those groups have in common is a very populist mentality, right? Like anti-elite and pro-people, which is why policies like a $15 minimum wage pass statewide while Trump wins, right? And so I think it's so important to elect leaders that are willing to understand those dynamics and also, build coalitions ourselves. And a part of that is challenging corporate greed. And I think that if Democrats continuously bend over backwards to meet the needs of their corporate overlords, then we are never going to win in this state. Like, I just think that's such an important piece of our platform, is that we have to be pro-people. And sometimes being pro-people requires challenging corporate greed. But if you're too scared to do that because of the consequences, then you're not going to be able to build that coalition we need to succeed. I
want to just say that we don't have a lot of historically good politicians in Florida, but in this podcast, we stand Ruben Askew. And yeah, I know your sister's also a Ruben Askew stan. So
oh yeah, well, Ruben Askew, for the listeners who don't know this, he was a Democrat that campaigned on a corporate income tax. And then he created, with the legislature's support and voter approval, creates a corporate income tax, right? So again, just reaffirming the point I just made about corporate accountability, it's a very important but also popular issue. And to this day, only 1% of Florida businesses even pay a corporate income tax. It's about $2.8 billion of revenue compared to sales tax, which is about 10 times as much. And so taking on corporate greed and building structured corporate accountability are very important trademarks of the Askew administration, and it should be values of the Democratic Party as a whole.
Yeah, I was going to say that the only problem with your vision is that if we are a rainbow state, then we wouldn't be allowed to be taught in our own elementary schools, unfortunately.
Right, because rainbows have been banned and rainbows trigger Republicans. Yeah. Fair point.
Is a lot of that due to climate change?
Yeah, ultimately, but they'll lie to you and tell you like that's a great place to start to bring us back in, because we're going to talk about exactly that, right? Like, it is in reality, if you talk to any of the insurance companies, the company line and the industry line is that it's litigation, that it's about the threat of, which is true. Like, there is much more unsavory or unwarranted litigation happening in that space, right? Like, the guys do go around, and roofers and insurance adjusters go around knocking on the door and saying, hey, how long has your roof been that way? You know, we can get you a brand new roof. All we have to do is sue your insurance company. And yeah, that happens. It happens. But like, for example, one of these guys that we're going to talk about right now, I believe it's the insurer called UCP. I'm sorry, UPC, United Property and Casualty. Out of 760, they're going to leave. They have left, and they're going to probably end up being insolvent. They're leaving Florida. 760,000 policies, right? That's 760,000 people that are scrambling right now to find a new insurance company. Most of them are just going to end up on Citizens, but they're leaving, they say, because of this outrageous, crazy, out of control, litigious environment, right? Where they're constantly getting sued. They have 1,000 open lawsuits. Sounds like a lot, sure, and it probably is super costly, but 1,000 is not a huge percentage of 761,000.
Yeah.
I mean, if you told me like, 1/5 of all of our people are trying to, of our policyholders are suing us, like, damn, that's crazy, man. You should get out of there. But it's not that big. And I think, Jared, to your point, it is climate change. They but they just can't say it, because if they say that we're doing this because of climate change, that
everyone would move. Yeah.
Yeah. It undoes so much of the work that they have to acknowledge it around. Don't forget, a lot of these companies are owned by they're subsidiaries of larger insurers that insure millions and millions of homes around the country. So then what? They've got to have like Nevada talk, like, you know, their policyholders in Nevada and Arizona and California are going to start asking about the water table there.
Yeah.
And, you know, yeah.
No, I mean, insurance, similarly to like banking, it's based on confidence and trust, right? Because you need people to be able to trust the system to, you know, and the insurer themselves to like be able to like have that pool of money in reserve to basically dip into it to help those in moments of crises or whatever. But, you know, similarly to a run on banks, if enough people don't trust that pool of money to be stable, they're either going to try to get their money out, or in case of the insurer, you know, there's not going to be any trust, any confidence that pool of money is sustainable. And what it's revealing is that climate change and the general direction of our, you know, society is creating conditions that are not conducive for these systems to operate as they once were. The reality is that, you know, yes, the insurers in Florida are greedy, you know what I mean? And they're taking advantage of the situation. But in a way, climate change does make it really, really risky for them to operate in this state. I mean, I always think about it. Can you imagine if a hurricane level 4 or 5 hits Miami? Like, we are done. Like, the city is over.
Yep.
You know, like, it will be a Katrina style event.
Yeah, they talk about this. I mean, like, we saw what happened when Irma just 6 years ago or 5 years ago came through Miami, and we had never seen.
But no, hold on. But Irma didn't come through Miami. Irma came through the Keys.
You're right. It barely strafed us. Yeah, it just, we caught the edge of it. Yeah.
And it fucked.
And do you remember? I don't know if you remember this. I think we were all living here at the time when I had never seen, in years of living here, I had never seen Brickell, the downtown area, one of the downtown adjacent areas of Miami, like submerged, fully submerged.
The financial
I couldn't
district.
believe it.
It was just So that was a barely hurricane level 1, barely, like a very weak hurricane level 1 that like strafed like Homestead, like the southern part of Miami-Dade County strafed it while mostly going through the Florida Keys. And it fucked this city up. Like we were flooded, infrastructure damage, power out for 2-3 weeks, 4 weeks in some parts of the county, slow response times from emergency services, FPL in disarray. People couldn't get basic shit like ice out, like it. Can you imagine, again, if a hurricane level 3, let alone a 4 or like a 5 hits us, like a Hurricane Andrew level event, we are done. And we can get into this in another episode, but our infrastructure is so bad because they have zoned, these like luxury high rises and multi-level buildings, but they don't do anything to upgrade our sewage and water. So, it rains for fucking 5 minutes and the streets are all flooded. So we're in bad shape.
Well, what happens when you build an entire state around, its regulatory environment, not around the actual realities of things that need to be regulated and like, oh, this needs to work this way. But when you configure it all around who's paying what money, and like, oh, well, yeah, practically as a common sense exercise, we probably shouldn't have enormous high rises, skyscrapers on the water. Like that doesn't make sense. But at some point in time, George Perez related group type person started the spigot, got the spigot open and started paying for the zoning variances and started paying to build up, this larger development plan of what we see today. There's still, if you guys go back and look through press releases of like projects that have been abandoned in the last 10 years, there's like 20 different huge high-rise Brickell, Miami Beach, or downtown projects where they were like, oh, we're going to build a fucking an affront to God, a 500-story, There was one that they had to nix because they were worried about the fucking planes approaching Miami International Airport being like too close to it because it was so huge. And I can't help but wonder, looking at that shit, are you guys living in the same city that I live in, where you're like, oh, let's build some other monstrosities all along? Oh, we can carve out 1/4 of a block here to make another, luxury condo high rise right here. It's like two common senses going, like diverging in a wood, like going in different directions completely. And I think that to transition into this segment, one of the things that we want to do is that's a huge question, like who's responsible for that. But we can talk a little bit more about like who we can kind of name and shame a little bit more who we've been talking about in this episode, which is the insurance companies, right? The insurance industry would have you believe that they're just hemorrhaging cash in this state and that they're scurrying away, tails between their legs, beaten, bruised, broken. But I'll tell you two groups of folks who aren't broke, and that is the executives and the investors for these companies. Fellas, one of my favorite things to do, it's kind of cope for me. Like it's a way that like I like process a lot of this shit when bad things happen. I like to just, whenever I encounter free market failures that almost always inevitably screw over the average person, I love to log into one of my favorite premium public information databases and find the home addresses of the people getting rich off of the misery of others, and then plug those addresses into Google or Zillow or Redfin and just get a look at, these merchants of misery, like where they get to go home at night and kind of lay their heads. And
David, are you like the Joker for insurance companies? Like,
and here we go. So I did that with some of the insurance company. Yes, Jer, I am.
Nice.
I'm trying to remember some Joker lines, but like but I've beaten them all out of my head. What if I did some Jared Leto Joker lines?
Yeah, get a tattoo that says basket case or whatever.
Damaged. Yeah, damaged.
Yeah, you guys think that that's funny until I start sending you both like used condoms, like he did to his co-stars on that.
Oh, instead of damage, it should be uninsured across your forehead. Yeah.
David, you should do that line in Joaquin Phoenix's Joker. What do you get when you cross the Miami homeowner with property insurance that abandons him and treats him like trash?
You think that backgrounding these people and getting pictures of their homes, you think it's funny?
I do,
and I'm tired of
pretending it's not, Murray.
So let's get started with the CEO of the actual insurance company that dropped me. Is this one a little bit personal? Yeah, it is, but oh well. Let's have a look at the home of Centauri CEO Richard Espino in Bradenton, Florida. Again, I'm not going to give the at home addresses or anything of these guys, but boom. So yeah, there's Richard's home. It is a $3.3 million 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom, 4,400 square foot 2-story. It looks like near Jupiter, Florida. Now he recently sold this home and moved to Texas. So this, along with abandoning Florida, maybe he couldn't get insurance for it. Who knows? But yeah, this is Richard Espino's home. What Jerry? I know you have a great design eye. What do you see? Looking at this is like
I see the
kind
home
of Jupiter
a legitimate
chic.
Businessman. This looks like the headquarters for, like in the James Bond movie where he's tracking the villain, but turns out that villain was just working for a bigger guy. This is the home of that middle guy who Daniel Craig has to go and kill him, and then finds out this guy was only working for an even larger, more nefarious guy. Yeah, this looks like But
then James Bond gets drone striked.
Yes.
Spoiler alert.
Let me tell you, I said Redfin and Zillow, but this address, this photo, I had to do some homework to find this one because a lot of the photos that you in the sources where you would normally find them are suspiciously absent. Like this was a result of some investigative work finding this photo of this property. It is not easy to find pictures. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it is not easy to find pictures of Richard Espino's Bradenton, Florida home. But I was able to find this one. So we should be all lucky. We consider ourselves lucky. Like it's almost like being invited into his house, I would say.
There looks like a middle balcony area, like where he can stand over his driveway, like the Pope stands over the Vatican Square. Like it's very nefarious looking.
This is probably like one of my worst, being raised in American capitalism traits is that I would love to have a driveway like that. Like I know that he probably had to kill like 5 species of Cuban tree frogs or some shit like that to make it happen. But like that I would love to have a huge cobblestone driveway like that. I mean, I only have one car, but who knows? If I was that rich, I would.
I will say the cobblestone aesthetic is nice, but it doesn't really fit with the home.
No, the home is super ultra modern.
Yeah. It's weird.
Up next, as we leave Richard to, enjoy. You know what? Let me just say one more thing about this house. At least a little bit of it is mine because I paid this guy $2,000 a year for like 7 years to just get like unceremoniously dumped.
And then he abandoned you.
He abandoned me. Up next is a much more sort of modest home, but appearances can be deceiving because this home is located right here in Miami, Florida, which means that it's about 60% more expensive than it should be. It is the home of the CEO of Weston Insurance, which recently declared insolvency and left 22,000 policyholders in the lurch. Deanne Nixon. Miss Nixon is a fellow Miamian. This house is actually very close to me. I'm not going to say where because I'm also not going to dox myself. But guys, this is what $1.3 million in Miami gets you. It is 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom, 2,700 square feet. A very modest ranch home, actually. But not one that any of us on this phone call would be able to afford to purchase.
Speak for yourself, losers.
Oh,
Tomas still has like a bunch of Argentinian pesos in his in that apartment somewhere. Like he's waiting for the rebound.
Yeah. Every time he goes up to Tallahassee, he brings some of DeSantis's gold back home with him.
The Argentinian peso is my personal version of the Iraqi dinar.
You're like, it's coming. It's coming back one of these days.
Yeah.
Guys, I want you to meet Daniel Peed, which is a great name.
Cool
CEO
name.
of United Property and he is Mr. Peed is the
hell yeah.
Is the CEO of United Property and Casualty Insurance, whose company tagline is "Keeping the Promise." Apparently, that promise included fucking over the 761,000 policyholders that UPC has in Florida, piecing out of not just Florida, but Louisiana and Texas as of August. Amoral? Sure. But check out what 761,000 fucked over homeowners can buy you, fellas. Look at that. Look at that.
So this is the pee
This is the
palace
pee.
that we've all heard
This is
of.
the piss house.
It's a horrible home.
Yeah, this is like textbook McMansion. Like the other home, we were talking about like one guy. All right, so first house.
But
guy
let
thinks
me
he's
give
the
a little
Pope.
context. Would the two of you be surprised to find out that this home, this $1 million plus home, $1.2 million, is a 5-bedroom, 5-bathroom, 5,000 square foot home, is located in, I believe, suburban Houston, Texas.
That makes total sense. That is a house.
I would 100% believe
Yeah,
this.
that is a very Houston home, like Houston McMansion home. Yeah, that makes total sense. I don't think it actually looks like it, but for some reason, it reminds me of the house like that the Osbournes used to be shot in. I don't know.
Oh
it
my
just
God,
has that
yeah.
cheap, weird reality TV like McMansion.
Yes.
Vibe.
Oh
yes,
yeah,
absolutely, completely. I see that.
Horrible.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that show. Fuck, man.
This looks like you said, like they were like shooting like for like The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, and all the other homes turned them down, and this home said yes.
This is the backup. The production team is like,
all the other homes were like, we can't get property insurance, so
so if anything happens to you, we'd be liable. Yeah.
No, it's when you're location scouting and you're like, okay, well, these 3 are professionally managed and but they're all booked, so we have to go with this one that like it's just some guy and he's like renting his place out, and that's like, and there's a bunch of weird rules like we can't have juice in the living room after 6 or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, that was the home of like, I'll say this about UPC because I've been following this issue, and you guys know I've been like kind of steeped in this fucking thing. It's become my little personal hobby horse the last couple of months. UPC is probably the biggest offender on this list. Like what they did. What they did relative to what their market value is, the ability that they could have had to like not fuck over almost 1 million people, like is a lot of these other people, what you see are they're either subsidiaries or they're smaller companies that became insolvent, and yelling at them is like yelling at your dog when your dog dies. It doesn't do any good. It's like, yeah, the dog died, man. What are you going to do? Like, but this one is one of this UPC company is probably one of the more egregious examples of the corporate greed that we're talking about. Which brings us to our last one. I want you guys to meet Robert McCahill. Robert McCahill runs St. James Insurance Group, which was, up until recently, the majority shareholder and managing principal of St. John's Insurance Company, which was based in Orlando. Until recently, Mr. McCahill lived in this plush Windermere estate just outside of Orlando. So there's a good look.
Again with the Pope balconies.
Yeah.
I'm noticing a type with these guys.
This one, I believe, is pretty close to. I don't know. Did either of you ever watch the documentary "The Queen of Versailles"?
No.
Okay, so that was about the woman who was married to the guy that owns Westwood Group. Westwood Group was and might still be the largest stateside in the United States, the largest timeshare company in the world or in the United States. And the documentary centered on, it was a brilliant documentary. I recommend it to anybody who hasn't seen it, where her plan was to make the biggest, most ostentatious single family home in the United States. And she got very far into that process with her husband financing it, obviously, when 2008 happened. And the entire bottom of the timeshare market fell out. And the documentary was already in effect as sort of a PR tool for their family. And it became a different documentary when the financial crisis happened. It became about like these people living in this cavernous, half-built mansion who barely had enough money for groceries anymore and were like hounded on all ends by debtors. It's a great, fun documentary to watch. It's really good. But this house is right nearby in that area where that movie was made.
Of the houses we've looked at, if you were to say these houses are all owned by insurance company CEOs, I would say this one is the most normal. Like, this is the most like to type.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I could see, which makes me want, because it's so normal, it makes me wonder what or who is in the basement. Like, could it be like the files of people who they fucked over? Could it be a deranged nephew?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I have a thought on that. Just want to get the metrics out because this is a 5-bedroom, 7-bathroom, 7,862 square foot home that actually just sold 3 days ago for $6.9 million. So they are getting the fuck out of Florida, Jerry. They're following your lead. The McCahill family. I want to just like bring up one point before we close, and you touched on it a little bit there, Gerald. Is like, I've been doing background checks and in a sort of journalistic capacity, like finding people, getting public records about people, trying to build composite like informational bios about people without being able to talk to them for a really long time. I've used a lot of different tools to do it. This particular class of people, because I looked at maybe 6 or 7 other people too, this is the slipperiest, hardest to pin down class of people that I've ever done any background. More than politicians, more than public figures, more than celebrities. These people have their existences structured in a way where it is like trying to pick apart a fucking Delaware, LLC. It is so hard to figure out exactly where they live. These are multinational people, multi-state people. These are people that exist in a world that's different than us. They are rootless. They are in airplanes half the time. They are in private jets half the time. They are those like when you watch like HBO prestige dramas about rich people, like fucking Succession, and you're like, oh well, 1 second they're in they're in Bali, and then the next second they're in Lake Charles or whatever. Like that's what these people are. And it made it so much more difficult to find where they fucking lay their head, but not that much more difficult.
That's all for this episode of Why Are We Like This? Be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts for more episodes, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Visit us at wawlt.com. Follow us on Twitter at Wolt Show, and on TikTok at Wolt Show. You can also email us at walt@allpointswest.net. Until next time, this was Why Are We Like This? Wolt Mafia Rising.